Hello there and welcome to Stick Around. Clive here, and today I've got a music review for you of Noonday Dream by Ben Howard. Follow up to 2014's I Forgot Where We Were, which I was a big fan of actually. I really liked it. Singer-songwriter's a broad term, I suppose, so I'll narrow it down a little bit. He's of the sort of folky variety. He's really been expanding his sound since his first album, Every Kingdom, which was quite optimistic with quite simple songs, I suppose. Since then, his songs have got a lot longer. There's a lot more going on. He's focusing on really building these kind of massive soundscapes, a word that you're probably going to hear quite a lot of in this review. He's maturing in that sense and becoming more based on that rather than having these kind of tight songs with choruses and such that was the case on Every Kingdom. On Noonday Dream, he continues this development with some really mature soundscapes, loads going on, lots of different instruments, things coming in and out, and there's a whole host of sort of instrumental bedding behind the vocals on all the tracks. Speaking of the vocals, his kind of murmured delivery, his murmured sort of very quiet, mumbled delivery creates this kind of background feel to the album in a way that nothing's really jumping out and clamouring for your attention. It's just there. On to some of the songs that kind of jumped out for me to talk about. Ni Calibre's at Dusk, the opening track. After Ben sings the word perpetually, he's talking about eagles flying in circles perpetually. It's a great example of that kind of subtle and yet really heavily layered kind of instrumentation comes in and creates this instrumental soundscape, subtly takes you away, which is something I've always found with Ben Howard's album, which is that they have a very natural feel. It feels very embedded in nature, a little bit like an artist like Tallest Man on Earth. But with Tallest Man on Earth, a lot of it comes from the lyrics, whereas with Ben Howard, I think he creates that feel through the instrumentation and through the melodies and through the things he has going on in the music as opposed to the lyrics. Lyrically, the song's quite representative of the album, I suppose. It's quite contemplative, is that how you say that word? He's singing about sitting there counting his dollars, obviously from a previous tour or album sales or whatever, and it feels like this album's been written in with going to various places and kind of just in a sort of observational way and trying to create the feel of those places through the music. As throughout the whole album, like I've mentioned, the vocal delivery is very kind of restrained, it's murmured, it's mumbly. Even though the melody is strong enough, it could be belted out, but he doesn't need to. He throws it there in the background, and it's all the better for that, I think. Track 3 for me is the highlight of the album, A Boat to an Island on the Wall. It's an expansive piece, kind of starting with a solo acoustic guitar kind of fading in after some fairly sort of industrial almost sound effects, I suppose, eventually building to a pretty huge, here comes that word again, soundscape with a distorted guitar kind of grinding over the top and creating this really sort of atmospheric riff, which really pulls it apart from the rest of the things on the album. The vocals, again, never go really above a mumble, which kind of, to me, juxtaposes quite nicely with the kind of heavy riff and all the other sort of almost overblown but yet still subtle instrumentation going on in the track. At 7 minutes, it doesn't feel a second too long. It's a beautifully constructed, beautifully executed song, a real highlight. The Defeat is a really interesting track. Track 7 initially sounds like something off a completely different album. It's got this kind of heavy didgeridoo sounding start, which then it's only when the drums come in and it's got that kind of clean, brushed feel that you're familiar by this point from the album drum sound that it feels like, oh no, I've still got the right album. And it's just, that is probably one of the few times when it does kind of call for your attention, and I think it's a didgeridoo riff, correct me if I'm wrong, underneath the whole track creates this really sort of bassy feel that carries the whole track while Ben's kind of murmuring over the top of it, if you will. And I just really like the feel that track gave it, and I think it really, again, it stood out a little bit and broke things up on the album. I thought it was another highlight. Some tracks are more sort of beautiful than memorable, I suppose. What the Moon Does is a good example, but I still feel they add to the album as a whole. Even if you took them out kind of on their own, they wouldn't really do much. I feel there isn't really something I'd cut from here, which isn't something I often say for a 50-minute album, but I feel like everything kind of flows into each other very nicely. It's all, it just fits. The production is excellent, with every set of instruments being quite clean and obvious in the mix, and all coming together to create the atmosphere that really makes the album so special. There's, instruments dropping in and out to keep things interesting. It doesn't feel overproduced, despite the fact there is definitely a lot of production going on. The drums sound nice, like I've mentioned, the cream, crisp sort of brush sound. I feel that that complements the instrumentation of the album perfectly. The vocals are a bit thin and metallic sounding at points, but I feel like that's probably something they had to do to make it, you know, stand out in the mix because of the fact that he does all this murmuring. Something's got to push it above, and they've had to kind of narrow the frequency spectrum of it a little bit to make it a bit more audible and some of the lyrics a bit more clear. So sounds a bit thin, but I feel like as a whole it works really well. Overall, I think this is a great album. I think it's instrumentally absolutely gorgeous. I feel like Howard's restrained vocal style that I've gone on and on about complements these songs perfectly. They just kind of sit there, they just kind of exist, but in a good way. The lyrics are pretty, although never particularly memorable. There's nothing that really jumps out for me for being a, you know, great piece of lyrical work. Like I said before, the album feels kind of nature themed, despite which doesn't really come from the lyrics for me, it comes from the instrumentation. Words to Ben Howard are adding an extra tint to the tapestry, but they're not kind of creating this kind of poem or thing with meaning on their own. And I think that's fine. I think it works really well. It's an album that, you know, conveys its feelings with the instrumentation and the delivery of the vocals, and I suppose what the words are rather than what they mean when put together. Makes sense to me. Might not make sense to you. Sorry if it doesn't. Tea of judgment time. I'm going to give this album an 8. 8 is for great. I think it is a great album. It's up there with my favourites of the year so far. You're probably going to like it less if you have a strange hatred of didgeridoos, don't like acoustic guitars, more sensibly, you just don't like, you're more in it for the lyrics. This is not a lyrical album, like I've explained. You're probably going to like it more than I do if, you're a giant Ben Howard fanboy. You love everything he's done, you think he's a genius. I don't rate him quite that highly. I think he's great, but he's not, the first person I jump to in terms of the great musicians of the current. You're probably going to like it even more than I do if, folky soundscapes are your thing and you like to just lie down and be just completely engrossed by the soundscape that someone creates, or perhaps you even like instrumental music. I feel like this would appeal to someone who likes those kind of instrumental, more ambient albums as well. That's the end of my review. Stick Around is actually primarily a podcast, so check down there in the notes. There's details of how to get there. You can go to stickaroundpodcast.com. We've got articles of things, reviews, and currently doing a Studio Ghibli retrospective. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think I'm wearing too many items of clothing with a bird on? Shirt, hat, flip-flop. Comments below. But remember, be kind to each other.